Hi, Tom. Let me begin by asking you the following question. Two bitter enemies in the region, Armenia and Turkey, once again are trying to normalize relations. And for that, they have launched the process, appointed special envoys or representatives. They even managed to hold first meeting between Armenian and Turkish envoys, Ruben Robinyan and Serdar Kilic. What has happened? What was the driving motive behind this diplomatic effort?
Well, first of all, very good to talk to you again, Harry. I enjoy our conversations. So yes, it is obviously an attempt to what you might call third time lucky. There were, as you know, there were a serious attempts to normalize relations after independence, early 90s, and again 2008 to 2010 with the so-called football diplomacy and the protocols. And now we have a third chance. I think this one has a better chance of success because Azerbaijan is no longer vetoing the process. Because you know if you recall, the border was closed in April 1993 when Armenian forces captured Kalbajar. Kalbajar is now returned to Azerbaijan, as are all the other territories around Karabakh. So Azerbaijan basically has what it wants, and I think Turkey is happy to proceed. So that's the main thing to say. And I think the second important thing is that obviously we're talking about normalization of relations. We're not talking about reconciliation, which is a much more difficult, much longer term thing. The Armenian genocide is not part of these talks, at least as far as the Armenian side is concerned. So we're talking about normalization of relations, and after all, you know, don't forget Russia and Ukraine they're on the point of war. They have relations. Lots of countries have embassies in North Korea. So it's a very unusual situation in the world for two countries not to have diplomatic relations, and even countries which are quite hostile to one another have diplomatic relations in an open border. It's very unusual. So it's almost a minimum to have these relations. So we're not talking about a dramatic breakthrough. We're not talking about reconciliation between two countries. We're just talking about a slow normalization of relations. That, I think, should be possible.
There's a certain degree of skepticism about the process among Armenians, and it could be also the case in Turkey or elsewhere. Having in mind the colossal failure in the past when Turkish and Armenian leaders, I remember that scene, I was there covering as a journalist, turned this attempt to normalize the relations into international diplomatic drama. And in 2009, both sides signed the protocols with Hillary Clinton, Lavrov, Bernard Kouchner, Javier Solana, and others standing behind as witness mediators. The protocols were never ratified in both parliaments. What will happen now? Is there any difference between now and then? What's your take?
Well, I mean, there are key differences. Obviously, one I've already mentioned, which that Azerbaijan is no longer vetoing the process or trying to veto the process as they did back in 2009, 2010. Secondly, that initiative was very much led by Abdullah Gül, the then Turkish president. Erdogan was, on the margins. He couldn't make up his mind about it. In the end, he ended up opposing it. Now Erdogan is leading this process. It's, as I understand it, not really being led through the foreign ministers. It's basically being led from Erdogan's office in Ankara and Nikol Pashinyan's office in Yerevan. So that gives it a much stronger political leadership. But as you said, there are many people who are very skeptical. In Yerevan itself, in Armenia itself, are political forces who are against this. Some of them, I think, for purely domestic political reasons, people who supported the previous process but want to oppose Pashinyan. And obviously in the diaspora, as we know, there was quite a lot of opposition to the protocols and possibly even stronger opposition to this process because they don't want to deal with Erdogan. They worry about the competence of the Armenian government. On the Turkish side, also, I think Erdogan is in this informal coalition with the MHP, the ultra-nationalist party. They will oppose this process, or they will want many concessions out of Armenia, which Armenia cannot give. So there are reasons to be skeptical that this will work. Having said that, I think I personally think it should be supported because I think it will stabilize relations. I think it will be good for the Armenian economy, and I think it will open up Armenia. It will give Armenia different options, which it hasn't had for the last 30 years with its two closed borders.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about Erdogan. That's an interesting point. What is the interest here? What is going to achieve? I mean, why is he now pushing this process? It seems to me that he's really keenly interested to see something being done in this process. What's your take on that?
Well, a couple of things. I think, first of all, there's the economic factor. This would connect Turkey by rail directly via Armenia, if the economic routes open via Armenia to Nakhchivan, to southern Azerbaijan, then all the way around to Russia, also to Iran by rail via Nakhchivan. So there's a big economic incentive. There was a plan for a railway between Iğdır in Turkey and Kars, which would connect Nakhchivan, but that would cost $200 or $300 million. Why spend that kind of money when you can open Kars Gümrük and get that almost for free? But there's an economic factor. Secondly, I think Turkey was hoping for more, to be a big regional player at the end of the Karabakh War of 2020, and that didn't really happen. I think they felt a bit cheated by Russia. They hoped to be much more inside the post-war, post-conflict process, maybe even in the Minsk group. That didn't happen. I think they understand that the only way to be a player in the South Caucasus is if you have diplomatic relations with all three countries, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. So I think they see this as a route to being a stronger regional player in the South Caucasus.
And some opposition, let's talk about the internal politics in Armenia. Some opposition parties, as you already mentioned, that in the parliament and outside the parliament say normalization process between two countries is okay. But most of these parties believe that the current government is too weak to handle these talks with Turkey. So therefore, they think that it's wrong, that, this current government is engaged with Turkey. They believe that, this can happen. This, again, the talks are okay, but the government cannot really negotiate with Turkey, very strong, powerful player in the region. What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a legitimate question there. As we know, Nikol Pashinyan's government is a very narrow circle of people who he knows personally, often for many years. Rubinyan, as we know, is just 31 years old, has no negotiating experience. So, it would be, I think, more encouraging if we saw a wider group of people involved, the foreign ministry, people with wide experience, with deep experience of previous negotiations, if they could be involved. I think that's a legitimate question. I think there's also a question about whether the road and rail route to Nakhchivan across Syunik, Zangezur whether this becomes part of the negotiations. If so, I think the Armenian side probably can't deliver, because the Azerbaijani side, is still asking for basically for sovereignty over this road, which is one reason why more than a year after the November 2020 ceasefire, there's been no agreement on this issue. So I think there are legitimate questions, but I think these are kind of tactical questions. I think that's a matter of improving, the expertise on the Armenian side, which I think is possible, and then taking advice from different concerned parties. But I think I don't think this should be a reason to stop the negotiations altogether. I think the overall benefit for Armenia is very good, and I think the business community, as I understand it, and I think this is very important, is strongly behind this.
If you are Tom de Waal is invited as an expert, outside expert, to help this negotiating team, what would be your advice how to proceed with Turkish diplomats? And we know this guy is very skillful diplomat. What would be your advice to Ruben Rubinian, for example?
Well, I mean, I think I probably wouldn't be invited to do this. If I'm invited, it would be to talk to both sides. I think both sides have a bit of a communication problem. They need to speak to their societies. They need to explain why this is a good idea, be more open about this in public. But I think on the Armenian side, there are people far more qualified than me, people who were at the foreign ministry in the late 2000s, negotiated the protocols, who are, still there. There are also, someone like Gira Liberidian is still there and actively following these issues. Talk to him. So I think just talk to some wise people about what should be your red lines, what you shouldn't give up, and you don't have to hurry. This process has waited 30 years. Don't be in a hurry. Just when you have some proposals, consider them carefully.
And judging from the first reaction in the Armenian community, especially in the US, diaspora will again fiercely oppose the normalization process without Turkey recognizing the genocide first. Besides that, diaspora has deep distrust towards Erdogan government. We know that. And diaspora believes that Erdogan just wants to get this F-16 from the US, F-16 fighter jets from the US, and improve its eroding image in the West, in Europe. What do you think, how the diaspora will behave here, and what's your take on that? Would that somehow impact this process that both sides have started?
Well, I mean, again, I get back to the point. This is about normalization, not reconciliation. That one, I don't think one should tie the opening of relations between two states, the state of Armenia and state of Turkey, to this deeply tragic personal story of so many Armenians, and to make it a part of negotiations. That's a much longer term process for Turkey to come to terms with the Armenian genocide, which began to happen. Let's not forget, in the 2000s, when there was the opening up in Turkey on this issue. So I think I think this is why successive Armenian governments have not made this a precondition. And if there's more contact between the societies, more Armenians going to Turkey, more Turks going to Armenia, I think there would be better understanding, which can lead in the long term to better understanding on the Armenian genocide. Certainly there are groups in Turkey who led this effort who are now marginalized. That worries me. People like Osman Kavala, who I know personally, who's still sitting in jail, who was very much an active participant in this process. But my hope is that, if this goes forward, if there's progress, Turkey will also change. Erdogan, is not there forever. There will be he faces an election next year. So that why waste time now waiting? If you have an opening, use that opening. I think that's my view on this. That there are risks, but I think the benefits are to my view, as an outsider who has no vested interest, just looking from outside, look stronger.
You know what? There is anxiety in diaspora in the States, in the United States mostly, that Armenian government is abandoning genocide recognition drive, campaign around the world. So they're worried that, they will outsource this to the diaspora, and they will say, hey, you have to fight for this, but we have to go and engage with Turkey. That's a real concern here. What do you think about this?
Well, I think, I rather see the opposite, that after the US administration, the Biden administration recognized the Armenian genocide, that helped normalize the term around the world, and it's also recognized in Moscow and in Paris. It's in many European countries. I've always followed the wisdom. For me, the words of Hrant Dink, I think, are the most important ones here. That the most important place for this to be acknowledged is in Turkey. That the other places are secondary, and then you need to work with Turkish society. Whether what one foreign parliament does or doesn't do is much less important. That process was going much better 15 years ago, but I'm sure one day it will get back on track again. Who knows when? But there's no. I think the denialists of this are very much in the minority nowadays.
And what do you think? What is Russia's role? It seems to me that they want to remotely manage the process of normalization in order not to allow it turn into the full reconciliation or rapprochement between the two enemies, not to let them go too far. That could result in losing its influence in its most trusted and perhaps the only ally in the South Caucasus.
I think Russia was always a bit equivocal about this process before, but now they have reasons to support it. I think they feel that Armenia is very strongly, is strongly in their camp, is going nowhere. They also have, this kind of slightly strange up and down relationship with Turkey, but they think, they feel they have a fairly, trusting relationship with Turkey on many issues. There's also the economic incentive that, again, if the railways reopen, you have a rail link from Moscow through Azerbaijan, through Nakhchivan, through Armenia to Turkey and Iran, which benefits Moscow, bypassing Georgia. So I think Moscow probably sees more benefits now than negatives from this agreement.
Now let's talk about Armenian-Azeri relations. Do you think that Aliyev will ever stop its anti-Armenian rhetoric and start talking about peace only, showing genuine interest in getting peace with Armenia? One gets an impression that even if Armenia decides to make major concessions to Baku, yes, as a journalist, turn this attempt to normalize the relations into international diplomatic drama. And in 2000, the Azeri president will still continue to be hostile towards Armenia and will still continue threatening Armenia with military force. Therefore, unstable and volatile relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan will be the situation that Armenia has to live with. Isn't that the case?
Well, certainly, the pressure, the rhetoric certainly has continued since the end of the Karabakh War in 2020. But I see President Aliyev as ultimately a pragmatic figure who negotiated with the Armenians for many years. He's a businessman as well. So I think in the moment he sees a political gain in continuing to put pressure on Armenia. He's particularly interested in the road to Nakhchivan. I think when the status of that road is agreed, I think that will probably, if that status of that road and rail link is agreed, probably a page will be turned, because then Armenia and Azerbaijan will suddenly have to cooperate around that road and around trade links. But I think at the moment he wants to put maximum pressure on Armenia to deliver maximum results, and I think that's what's going on. And certainly, it's difficult, I'm sure, if you're sitting in Armenia, to read what is said, to see the pressure on the border. There's still violence, people occasionally dying. It's difficult. But on the other hand, I think it's very possible for one day President Ilham Aliyev suddenly to turn the page, say, we've got an agreement now, and now we will talk with our Armenian friends. That's also perfectly possible.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the standoff. Yeah, the standoff between the West and Russia or Ukraine. Russia massed more than 100,000 troops near Ukrainian border, and Western officials believe Russia will invade Ukraine. NATO countries are sending weapons, logistical support to Ukraine, sending advanced military jets and other enforcements to Eastern European countries such as Poland, Estonia, Slovakia. On one hand, we hear from the Western capitals that Russian invasion to Ukraine is imminent. On the other hand, President Zelensky says the West is exaggerating. There is no imminent threat. What's your take? What will happen?
Well, I'm just an observer here. I mean, I'm one of those who's a bit skeptical that Russia would launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. If we judge President Putin over the last 20 years, more than 20 years, he's never embarked on such a high-risk operation. He likes easy wins, like in Crimea or in 2014 or in South Ossetia in 2008, which were areas where the Russians enjoyed widespread support. He wouldn't enjoy that support if he sent the Russian army into Ukraine. There would be losses. The Russian public, I don't think, would be happy. There would be big Western sanctions, and he might not achieve the result. It could do him more harm than good. So I see this more as a performance by Russia to try and get some concessions from the West on European security, to forget about Crimea, to put some pressure on the West, which doesn't now. This is still a dangerous moment, and it's very unpredictable. I don't think we should be complacent at all. The Russians could still do something which is less than a full-scale invasion, but still quite dangerous. So I don't think it's a time to relax. But I'm hoping that this is just a kind of rather big performance, a bluff on the part of the Russians.
Do you think this conflict around the Ukraine were strengthening Moscow's influence over the former Soviet republics, or the opposite?
I think if there's an escalation with Ukraine, that will definitely have a negative impact on the Caucasus, for sure. It's already having a negative impact, but I think that can be contained. I think personally, I would think it would have a negative impact. It would be certainly difficult for a country like, both for Armenia and Azerbaijan, who would like to have this balancing foreign policy if possible. So that's for sure. But if war can be avoided, then I think we probably still see the more pragmatic Russia, the Russia who's trying to play a bit with the West, use institutions like the CSTO and the Eurasian Union for influence, and not and not use direct military force in the Caucasus.
And Tom, how would you decipher Russia's decision to send its troop to Kazakhstan to help Tokayev in toppling Nazarbayev? This was actually the first time that Moscow intervened directly in regime change in the neighboring country. And what we can learn from this?
Well, I think we maybe still don't quite understand the sequence of events, but it's certainly, Moscow certainly wasn't involved from the start. I think we know that there were some street protests which then escalated and became an inter-regime struggle in Kazakhstan, and that Tokayev, wanted, he made the call to Putin and the Kremlin to kind of not to lose power, to save himself, and certainly that obviously put an end to 20, 30 years of Kazakh balancing foreign policy. That's for sure. But having said that, the Russians have now gone home, so we'll see what. I think it'll take some time to see what is the long-term price Kazakhstan has to pay and Tokayev has to pay for calling in the Russians.
Mm-hmm. When I said what we can learn from this, I was referring to the future possibilities of Russia. Maybe it's already fed up with this, as they say, their color revolution attempts. Maybe they change their foreign policy, actions. Now they're more resolute in intervening in neighboring countries. That's what I was asking, whether we can we're witnessing sea change in Russia's foreign policy in that they are ready to invade, to stop regime change, or, what's your take on that?
I mean, I would say they also, in a sense, it's not anything new. They also worked very hard to support Lukashenko when he faced this kind of revolution. They tried to save Yanukovych, but without success back in 2014. So, these are three countries, I guess, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan are probably the most important for Russia. But again, as we all recall, in 2018, they did nothing to save Serge Sarkisyan in Armenia. So I think there's always a calculation in Moscow, what is the risk and what is the benefit? And obviously, maybe in these three countries, a direct intervention was deemed to be worth the risk, but in Armenia, it wasn't worth the risk.
Now, last question, Tom. I know that for you, Nagorno-Karabakh was one of your, main research topic. And what's your research now? What are you thinking about Nagorno-Karabakh? Is it lost case? Is it going to be back again on negotiating on diplomatic tables? What's your prediction here?
Well, it's a kind of sad story for me personally, because I spent so much time going to Armenia, to Azerbaijan, to Karabakh. Maybe I made 10 visits to Karabakh over the years, and working on trying to support a peaceful resolution. And then it came to another war, which was sad for me, to see all those people I knew caught up in that war, and also for all the things I'd written and tried to do, being blown away by the war. I'm a short-term pessimist. I think there's massive problems. I think 2025, I think, will be a very difficult year, which is the year that the Russian peacekeeping mandate expires. But I guess in the longer term, I think Armenia and Azerbaijan will still have no option but to have some kind of peaceful coexistence. I hope that will happen in my lifetime. But I certainly, I'm still quite a short-term pessimist, unfortunately, on this issue, that the war made things harder to resolve, and I think it will still is a problem which is not going to be resolved soon. It's going to still have to be managed, and hopefully managed without more violence, without another conflict.
But do you think the status is still will be something that, you know, will become the subject of discussions between international mediators? Is it still the status of Nagorno-Karabakh is alive, or what do you think?
Well, it's still alive. The Minsk group, you know, Azerbaijan has still not walked out of the Minsk group process. They make some rather negative comments about it, but they keep it alive. And as long as the Minsk group process is alive, there will still be negotiations on the status of Karabakh. Clearly, the Karabakh Armenians are in a much weaker position. You know, clearly the demands sort of a few years ago were completely impossible. But I think, you know, the discussions will continue. In 2025, they again will have another crisis point. But again, I don't see the Russians walking away from their peacekeeping mission there, so de facto there will still be a Karabakh Armenian kind of entity as long as the Russian peacekeepers are there. It's not a good situation, but I guess for them it could be worse.
Mm-hmm. So you think that Russians will stay there for a longer period of time, like not only 1 term, 2 term, maybe more, 2 terms and maybe 3rd term?
Who can tell? I'm sure many people in Baku would like to see them gone, but they will also try and find reasons to persuade their Azerbaijani friends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Really very interesting take on what's happening here in Armenia, in the region. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, thank you.